congratulate you, Charlie, on your extraordinary success. You've been such a critical element of the success of the MAGA movement, building this durable framework for populist governance. And so I hope your audience appreciates how much we appreciate you.
Well, thank you, Stephen. And we have reciprocal respect here. And I hope everyone in the audience understands that Stephen in the White House every single day is holding down the anchor of the populist nationalist MAGA movement. Every single day, Stephen Miller is in the meetings. He is talking about more deportations. He is going through the entire list of what did we campaign on, what did we promise, and are we delivering it? And you deserve a ton of credit there. Stephen, we have some time, and I want to build momentum behind this big, beautiful bill, because I think some people are losing the profundity and the significance of what this bill will actually accomplish. What is, in your opinion, the legislative history, the historical significance behind this bill, and what does it mean for the conservative project more broadly?
Yes, it's such an excellent question. And let me start, for your audience that doesn't know me as well, just a little bit, and I normally wouldn't do this, but a little bit of extra context on myself. I started working in the conservative movement, like you, Charlie, when I was still a kid. I was in high school. Went to war with my administration and teachers at Santa Monica Public High School over radical left-wing indoctrination. Carried on the fight at Duke University. Fought relentlessly to defend the innocence of the Duke lacrosse players. My first boss on Capitol Hill was Michelle Bachmann of Minnesota. We were Tea Party before there was a Tea Party. I spent my entire adult life in this movement. In the summer of 2015, I started working for President Trump, recognizing instantly that this was the man who was going to finally be able to create a winning formula for populist, nationalist, conservative governance, that he was going to be our antidote to the corruption, to the failures, to the sinister machinations of our failed elites and the ruling class, which is why they spent 10 years trying to destroy him. Mm-hmm. That's what brings us to this moment. I have waited my entire life, and if I was older, I would say I've been waiting for 100 years, because there's never been a bill like this bill since there has been a conservative movement. This represents the culmination, in the case of the MAGA movement, of 10 years of hard work. This bill would have been unthinkable in 2017, in the Paul Ryan era. In this bill is the codification of President Trump's most important campaign promises. It is done through a process known as reconciliation, which allows us to enact them into law with 50 votes, not 60. No Democrats are involved. There's no trading with Democrats. No Democrats are involved in the writing or crafting of this bill, nor is it written by the Appropriations Committee. This bill is written by the most conservative lawmakers in Congress, people like Jim Jordan. It is written out of the policy-making committees by the Republican members there. So, for example, as has been much discussed, it fully funds the deportation agenda. It fully funds massive expansions in the number of ICE deportation officers, ICE beds, ICE deportation flights, and the complete permanent physical sealing of the entire southwest border. All of that money, all of that funding is provided up front. This was a 10-year plan. In other words, going back to 2017, when Paul Ryan didn't give us the money for the immigration project, for 10 years, we thought, given the chance to do it again, we would put all of the immigration money in the first bill out of the chute up front. That's what this bill does. And also significant additional changes to the administration of our immigration system. For example, there's language in here cracking down on nationwide injunctions. There's language in here raising the fees on foreigners coming to our country so that we can protect the American taxpayer. There's language in here expanding the mission of the Defense Department to seal and protect the U.S. border. And I could go on. Of course, the bill also includes in it every single tax promise that President Trump made on the campaign trail, but in particular the populist tax promises to forge that deep alliance with the working class of this country. No tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, no tax on overtime. Look, if Ronald Reagan had just done no tax on tips, they'd still be giving speeches about it today at the Reagan Library.
That's true.
They'd have a whole week at the Reagan Library just devoted to that time that Ronald Reagan did no tax on tips. There'd be whole statues. There'd be museum displays. They'd have entire industries built off of just telling the story of the time Reagan did no tax on tips. Isn't that right, Charlie?
Without a doubt. I mean, that alone is it's such a major political accomplishment. The Senate passes a ceremonial 100-0. Everyone agrees on no tax on tips, and no one has delivered it. So, Stephen, our audience wants more deportations. Our audience wants to see the campaign promise and campaign mandate fulfilled. How will this bill allow us to have permanent border security, fully finance the wall, and allow us to take our sovereignty in our country back?
Yeah, so in terms of the defense and the saving of Western civilization, this bill is a now or never movement. For those who say, well, split it up into a bunch of different bills, you should understand what that would mean. First, it would immediately change it from a 50-vote threshold to a 60-vote threshold. I'm not here to justify or explain Senate rules. I'm here to tell you reality. And the reality is, under the rules of the Senate, you split it up. Each individual provision that is now included in the big, beautiful bill that passes with 50 votes would require a 60-vote threshold, which would mean none of them would be enacted into law, but particularly the immigration provisions. Furthermore, not all members, and I want to be too specific here, but not all members of the Republican Party have the same view about all of these issues. By including the immigration language, with the tax cuts, with the welfare reform, it creates a coalition. Politics is all about coalitions. It creates a coalition across the Republican Party to enact this legislation into law, again, which is 50 votes. The three major constraints on deportations are personnel, prisons, and planes. Personnel, prisons, and planes. ICE prisons, also known as ICE beds, ICE detention centers, ICE officers, personnel, planes, deportation planes. So, like the most fundamental level, this bill is the largest ever increase in those three categories. Just on the point about ICE officers, as an example. So, ICE was created after 9/11 to secure immigration system. This, at least for a very brief and fleeting period of time, though was never acted upon, there was an understanding that foreign migration was the principal national security threat. Uncontrolled, unvetted, unchecked foreign migration created the conditions for terrorism. So we created ICE. ICE has received no increase in personnel since its creation.
That's a remarkable.
Even as the number of illegal aliens has exploded exponentially.
Repeat that. That's
so there are still
just
less
repeat
than
that, Stephen.
6,000.
That's so amazing.
Yes.
So we now have 25 million illegals, and yet ICE is still the same size as it was 20 years ago. That's remarkable.
Yes, more than 20 years ago. There's less than 6,000 full-time ICE deportation
Think about it.
officers.
Every other government agency grows by default. I hope everyone understands this, right? We get more TSA agents. We get more bureaucrats. We get more mid-level managers. We get more Department of Education. We get more DEI officers. We get more diversity czars. But, Stephen, you're telling me the one part of government that we can all agree not to grow is the one that we need the most.
Yes, it's been strangled on purpose for 20-plus years. Yes, and so just speaking on a personal level, a big part of my own life's work, and of course it is President Trump's vision, boldness, leadership, and stewardship of the party that has brought us to the point of this being possible, has been to just increase the number of ICE officers. The appropriators have never agreed to do it in a generation, and this bill is the largest increase of any federal agency in a single bill. But this time, not for the bureaucrats, not for the lefties, but for ICE officers. So we're going to clean double the number of ICE deportation officers, but do many other things to expand deportations, giving a larger role for the military, fully funding 287G so that state and local governments can get involved in deportations, fully funding the National Guard immigration mission, and I could go on and on and on. So that alone would be the biggest conservative policy win in our lifetimes, just that provision. You cannot pass that as a standalone. That is not possible as a standalone. So understand, when you hear certain libertarians campaigning against this bill, they're not stupid. There are certain libertarians in the House and Senate who are trying to take down this bill. They're not stupid. They understand. They just don't care. I want to be very clear with you. They don't care. Immigration has never mattered to them. It will never matter to them. Deportations have never mattered to them. It will never matter to them. You will never live a day in your life where a libertarian cares as much about immigration and sovereignty as they do about the Congressional Budget Office. That day will never come. It will never happen. It's up to you. It is up to you, listening to my voice today, to vindicate President Trump's 10 years of effort and sacrifice to save the sovereignty of this country. And I'll say one other thing. If conservatives want to be able to govern this country, they have to stop being afraid of winning. History is set by winners. President Trump is a winner. President Trump survived 2 assassination attempts. President Trump was shot in the head. President Trump survived an effort in multiple jurisdictions to incarcerate him for life. President Trump is a winner. The conservative movement needs to be able to take yes for an answer, to accept winning. And then you make a huge, historic, successful victory, and then you go on to the next victory and the next victory and the next victory. Deep, deep, deep down inside, somewhere in the traumatized conservative psyche, amongst some, not all, amongst some, but enough, is an allergy to winning, a great fear of winning. There's a desire deep inside that would rather sit on a panel complaining about a bill than is celebrating a victory. And that instinct is everything that MAGA is allergic to. The MAGA movement, among many other things, is about understanding that to save this country, you have to be able to govern this country. And all of these procedural hurdles that are being thrown in the way, all of these highly technical bureaucratic complaints, which, by the way, are all fictional, all false, fake scores of tax cuts and everything else, are all born not from policy disagreement, but from a fear of winning. And that is what we must overcome more than anything else, or we will lose the country.
There is so much truth to this. I hope everyone understands. The most important thing that we can do to fulfill the mandate is reestablish our sovereignty. Tax on remittances, $1,000 upfront fee just to apply for asylum, changing the asylum process, fully funding ICE. Isn't it amazing how D.C., they become such fiscal conservatives when it comes to ICE? We're able to grow every other department of the federal government, but ICE has no growth. I wonder why. Because the main core, the life force of the globalist project is open borders. Stephen, stay right there. We're going to go through the borders here, and then we're gonna go through the borders. I'm just reading something. We're gonna go through the breaks. So they kind of are borders. We're gonna go through the breaks here, and then I'm gonna ask you just some of the questions that we're getting on the questions.
I'm gonna get to a little bit of budget process too.
Yeah, I'm gonna just mention just some of Senator Ron Johnson, Senator Rand Paul's contentions, and I want you to respond to them.
Yeah, let's do that.
The world is waking up to the power of gold. National banks are racing to secure it. In 2024 alone, central banks added over 1,000 tons, the 3rd straight year of net gold buying. Why? Because gold is real money. Unlike paper currency, gold's value doesn't disappear with inflation, reckless spending, and market crashes. Noble Gold makes it easy to add gold to your portfolio. Right now, when you make a qualified investment, you'll get a free 10-ounce gold coin. Visit noblegoldinvestments.com. The world is turning to gold. Shouldn't you be looking into doing that too? Senator Ron Johnson, Senator Rand Paul say we're not going to vote for this because it raises the debt ceiling and it does not cut enough spending. Let me play cut 413. This is Senator Ron Johnson who said this on the show yesterday. Play cut 413.
Well, first of all, I know we're not going to meet the moment with one bill. We won't. The House didn't do it. We won't if we quick rush this thing through. So we've got to split this up, focus on the areas of agreement, border defense, take the spending reductions the House has given us that they've agreed to, extend current tax law, take the automatic tax increase off the table. That was a blunder in the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. We should have scored that in current policy. We weren't smart enough to do that. Increase the debt ceiling for about a year. Keep the pressure on. I've got to convince President Trump that is to his advantage. He wants to balance the budget. That's what he said. Well, we're not even coming close to putting ourselves on a path to balance the budget. He needs that leverage as well. We'll never default on the debt, ever. We've got more than enough revenue to service our debt. We will increase the debt ceiling, but we ought to do it in increments to keep the...
Okay, Stephen, what is your response here to Senator Ron Johnson?
So, on the debt ceiling, the only way to raise the debt ceiling without Democrat votes is to do it in a reconciliation bill. So, as the first point, if you take the debt ceiling out of this bill, the only way to avoid a catastrophic default, which would cause a surge in interest rates and therefore a surge in deficits and a giant debt explosion, would be to make a deal with Chuck Schumer, and that deal would come with significantly higher taxes, a huge bailout for California, many other terrible policies. So it would be a huge loss for conservatives. Now, the second point that he makes is, well, why don't we just split this up into a lot of different votes and everything else? If you've been watching, so we've been working on this legislation, this is far from being rushed. Since December, we've been working on this legislation. So it'll be almost a year of effort. If you split up the debt ceiling into smaller tranches, it will shut down the entire legislative project. We will just spend every month and every session till the end of time going through these internal procedural issues. We will inevitably come up short more than once and have to go to Chuck Schumer, begging and pleading to bail us out on the debt ceiling. We have the chance now, as Republicans, to raise the debt ceiling together, attached to
without
the
simultaneous concessions. So that's the argument. So the argument is that
concessions attached to the strongest set of conservative policy reforms.
Otherwise, Chuck Schumer would hold the debt ceiling hostage, and then we have to do all this other stuff we don't want to do. So the other question I have here, Stephen,
will every conservative.
I think that's smart.
Nightmare list.
It's very pragmatic. What do you have to say to the contention that this bill does not cut enough spending, that it is not a big enough cut? What is your response to that?
So first, facts just off the top. According even to the highly flawed Congressional Budget Office score, the bill cuts $1.6+ trillion in federal spending, including the largest welfare reform in history, far larger, by the way, than the much vaunted welfare reform from the Gingrich era in the 90s. So a full welfare reform attached to Medicaid and food stamps, the biggest welfare reform in history. And then again, $1.7 trillion, $1.6 or so trillion in spending cuts. Now, with respect to the CBO score, that score solely is referring to the tax cut. So there's been a deliberate bad faith substitution argument that's been made here. We have certain people, some libertarians, making bad faith arguments saying, oh, the CBO says it's going to explode the debt. The CBO says it's going to explode the deficit, and then therefore, because there's all this pork in the bill. No, there's no pork in the bill. The bill's been public for weeks. Every single provision is just one campaign pledge, one promise, one campaign vow after another. Right? The only new spending in the bill is to secure the homeland of the United States and save American sovereignty, fully paid for, by the way, by increased visa fees on foreigners. But the CBO score is just what they say is the cost of extending the 2017 Trump tax cut. For my entire life, every conservative fiscal voice has understood that not raising taxes doesn't cost anything. In other words, keeping the current tax rates in place has no cost associated with it. So that is a budget gimmick. The bill cuts spending. Now, for people who would say they'd like to add more spending cuts, here's a very important point. There'll be a process in the Senate. We will see what comes out of that process. This bill was never sold to the American people, not in the campaign, not in the transition, as the one great big chance to permanently solve America's debt problem. That kind of process requires significant public buy-in because you're talking about changing benefit programs that people, rightly or wrongly, rely on and depend upon. It requires significant public education. It requires multiple steps. We would be committing the same air in a different direction as Barack Obama did when he campaigned on dealing with the Wall Street housing recession and the housing meltdown, and he came in and did Obamacare. If we just came in and we said, oh, I know we campaigned on fully sealing the southern border, deporting all the illegals, reclaiming our sovereignty, reclaiming our national unity, unleashing American energy, deregulating the economy, extending all these tax cuts and making them permanent and making them bigger. But instead, our first bill is going to be principally a health care bill, right? That would be seen as a big switch on the American people, a bad faith switch. So yes, this bill will include very significant, very important welfare reforms and deep substantive spending cuts. But it is a fundamentally bad faith argument to say the tax cut and border bill is now a health care bill.
So the response, though, that some people would say is that why don't you do two reconciliation bills, one in 25 and one in 26? What would your response to that be, Stephen?
If we have a big win right now and we have the wind at our back, then absolutely, we will do another reconciliation bill and another reconciliation bill. And by the way, not having the debt ceiling on the future reconciliation bill, by doing it in this bill, will make it far easier to pass the next bill and the next bill and the next bill, to keep reforming government, to keep delivering conservative policy wins. I want to make one other point. Remember the first day, first week, the first couple weeks of the Trump presidency, when we did the big, beautiful bill version of executive orders, where every campaign promise that we could do was done, where we ended DEI, we ended CRT, we ended gender madness, we got the transgender troops out of the military, we sealed the border shut, all of those things. I don't remember anyone, any commentators on the right saying, oh, no, you can't do all your promises all so quickly. You got to titrate it out. Do 3 promises a year. The reconciliation bill is a chance in one fell swoop, without eating Democrat votes, so without a filibuster, to be able to codify the very campaign promises that we have done by executive order. So people keep saying, well, why don't you put the executive orders into law? That's what this bill literally does.
Yes.
And one last point. This bill is not a spending bill. So this might shock some in your audience who've been following the commentary online. How much money does this bill appropriate to the Department of Education? $0. How much does it appropriate to left-wing NGOs? $0. How much does it give the Department of Labor? $0. Department of Commerce? $0. The federal workforce? $0. It's not a spending bill. It does not fund the government. It has 2 major fiscal provisions. It expands and makes permanent the tax cuts, and it fundamentally reforms welfare. And the most significant policy provision, which pays for itself,
hold that thought. We have 3 minutes here, and then I know I got to let you go. Response to people say, well, the bond market is a little shaky and wobbly on the bill. And then finally, I want you again to say that this would be one of the greatest legislative accomplishments in the Republican Party history. Any response to Rand Paul's contention the bond market is not responding very favorably here?
The number one thing that the bond market needs to see is predictability and certainty in our tax rates, including, by the way, the 100% expensing provision for new factories, fulfilling the president's manufacturing reshoring pledge, so that we can begin to realize the full potential of massive economic growth, both through job creation and reshoring, which will then increase revenues, create confidence, create certainty. That combined with tariffs, which we're already now seeing projections, even with the current rates at $3 trillion in tariff revenue, that will provide the bond market certainty. A giant tax cliff combined with a giant debt cliff is the worst thing for bond markets. As far as, again, how significant and historic this bill is, the 2017 Trump tax cuts were rightly hailed as one of the conservatives' great victories. How much greater would we say that victory was if it also included full funding for the border wall? What if it also included full funding for deportation? What if it also defunded transgender surgeries nationwide? What if it also had the first ever endowment tax on America's corrupt institutions of higher learning? What if that bill also had no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security? What if that bill also created the strongest framework for energy deregulation in American history, right? What if that bill also created the first ever system for the Department of Defense to be involved in the defense of our southern border? In other words, one policy went after another, plus the tax cuts. Nothing like this has ever been done before in the history of the conservative movement. This bill is electric. It is that good. And it saddens me that there have been attempts to misportray it so severely. And that doesn't mean that we can't agree. Yes, let's keep finding ways to reduce the budget deficit. Let's keep finding ways to cut spending. Let's keep finding ways to lower our debt trajectory. But a rational person should be able to say, wow, it is amazing that this bill accomplishes the full tax agenda, the full border agenda, the full immigration agenda, the full energy agenda, large portions of the trans and de-wokeifying agenda, large portions of the higher ed agenda, also cancels the Green New Deal, also cancels the student loan bailout, also has the largest welfare reform in history. But you can acknowledge all of that, and then if you want to be an even greater fiscal hawk, say, but I'd like to cut more. But to pretend this bill includes pork, there's no pork in the bill. It's been public for weeks. And the only provisions you will find in the bill are campaign promises.
And Stephen, the other component of this that I think is important, and you mentioned this, though, guys, we have a budget that we have to do later this year that Congress will vote on, and another reconciliation bill next year, and another budget. And so there are other opportunities to get more spending reforms, to do more rescission. By the way, we're going to have Impoundment Act stuff that's coming up in the Supreme Court. There are another stabs to go after this. But let's also be very clear.
All government funding expires in September 30th.
Yes.
All government funding expires in September 30th. By the way, as proof that this bill isn't a, quote, spending bill, after we pass this bill, guess what still happens? Funding for the federal bureaucracy goes to zero September 30th. That will probably surprise some of your listeners who've been following the online commentary. They say, wait, how's that possible? I heard it was a spending bill. How's funding going to run out in September? Because it's not a spending bill. And the people who told you it was a spending bill lied to you. And the question you should be asking yourself is, how do we get to a place in the movement where we can have disagreements in good faith, which is the necessary condition for winning? But being addicted to a losing cycle is what will relegate the conservative movement to a future of failure. And that's the cycle we have to break.
Okay, final question here, Stephen. Some people on the internet are clamoring about this artificial intelligence amendment to it, or some sort of saying that local and state governments cannot regulate AI. What is the truth or the fiction here regarding this? This is receiving a lot of attention.
Yeah, so this is something that David Sachs has talked a lot about. Now, I wouldn't claim that this provision is essential to the framework of the bill in any way, but it's an example of another conservative policy win. So one of the biggest problems that we have as a nation is that California, because of its size, can set the rules for the entire country because companies have to do business there. So they set a fuel emission standard that all the car companies have to abide by that standard.
That's exactly right.
They say they're not going to allow energy infrastructure, then no one in the country can get energy shipped from our coast through California. So they basically bully, dominate, and intimidate freedom for the rest of the country. This provision prevents California from setting an AI standard that will then be the standard for every other state in the country. So if California mandates DEI, affirmative action, racial discrimination, and trans madness in AI, then that will be the model for the whole country.
I have not heard anyone make that argument, and that's exactly right, because almost all these AI companies are headquartered in California, so they could pseudo-nationalize the entire country if Gavin Newsom all of a sudden says, actually, no, in your large language models, you have to say that men can become pregnant. You have to be able to say that you have, white people are terrible.
Yes, they will be able to effectively nationalize AI policy for the entire nation through San Francisco. That's why this language was included. Again, people can say it's not essential to the framework of this bill, but it's another example of a conservative policy win inside the bill.
Are you optimistic this is going to pass?
I am optimistic, very optimistic, because fundamentally, I have faith in the power of the Trump voter.
Yes.
More than anything else, I have faith in the power of the Trump voter. The people who waited in line, the people whose hearts fell to their stomachs in Butler, Pennsylvania, and then left with joy when he stood up and raised his fist, the people who've been going through rain, sleet, and snow for 10 years, the people who endured alongside President Trump every prosecution, every hoax, every witch hunt, at this moment of culmination, of victory for the movement, I have faith in them to demand their members stand with President Trump, the man who has led this movement through one hardship after another for 10 years to bring us to the precipice of this victory.
Stephen, thank you so much. We have your back 100%. I think you made a phenomenal case for why we need to get this bill done. It is more than 80% of the pie, and we're going to balance this budget in subsequent reconciliations and budget. It still cuts over $1.6 trillion. And Stephen, you made a great case. Credit to you. Thank you for the time. Thank you for being generous. We're going to clip this and send it everywhere. And anybody, before you make up your mind on the big, beautiful bill, listen to this whole conversation. Stephen, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I want to hear from you. Email me, freedom@charliekirk.com right now. And if you missed any of that conversation, by the way, Stephen Miller, that was exclusive stuff. You will not hear Stephen in long form anywhere. You won't hear it on cable news. That right there is juicy, deep, really, really thoughtful analysis on all the main contentions. We're going to post all of it on our social media page and so also on our podcast. So we're going to post it on X. We're going to post it on Rumble. So make sure you guys subscribe to the Charlie Kirk Show podcast page. And look, this is a phenomenal opportunity. Blake made a great point in our chat. I think this is so great. There's so much good stuff in the big, beautiful bill. It's just simultaneously so upsetting that we're in such a bind because we're broke due to blowing money eternally on stupid stuff the last 40 years. It's a great point. And so it just kind of puts us in this bind, but there is so much good stuff here, everybody, that will liberate the American economy, that will grow, that will drill, baby, drill, and no tax on tips and tax on remittances and deportation agenda and build the wall. By the way, we're worried about a few $1 trillion. Well, the cost of the Iraq war we pointlessly fought 2 decades ago. It'd be great to have that money back.